Hi, I'm Rain Whalen, and this is Matt Couture. We're here in Totally Not a Bedroom Studios to take you on a journey through the 80s. We're going to throw some knowledge at your brain parts, and you're going to stir them all up, so afterwards we can take a nifty crossword puzzle. So buckle up, and here we go. The 80s was an explosion of culture and technology, advancing more rapidly than any other decade before it. Just like the 60s, it was truly a teenager's culture, seeing the emergence of many teenager-centric movies, such as The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller's Day Off, as well as the explosion of the music scene thanks to the creation of MTV and the popularity of artists such as Queen, Michael Jackson, and Metallica. Just like every other teenager culture before it, this new generation of youth was met with the scorn of their elders. After all, is this normal? Clad in heavy makeup, tight pants, and sprayed-on dews, the teenagers of this frightening period of America took it on by storm. Though not all that happened in the 80s was solely thanks to teenagers. The political scene was a torrent of anti-Russian sentiments and threats of nuclear war as the Cold War still raged on and even saw a resurgence in tensions, which deteriorated the already fragile relations between the US and the USSR. Many NATO countries abandoned the policy of détente due to Russia's invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 and their subsequent occupation throughout the 1980s. The threat of nuclear war had not been as high as in the 80s since the Cuban Missile Crisis nearly 20 years prior. Though nuclear war never seemed so likely, it all changed when Mikhail Gorbachev took power. Gorbachev attempted to change the inefficient and continuously poor Russian economy with a political movement called Perestroika. He also opened up broader and more frequent negotiations with the US, which he did with another political movement called Glasnost. He even attempted a complete disarmament with the US, which Reagan was totally for, but in the end, negotiations broke down and both sides kept their nukes. Gorbachev's efforts to end the Cold War were successful, and it ended in 1989 during his term. With it was also the fall of the Berlin Wall and the beginning of the revolutions of 1989, which signaled the end of the Soviet Union in 1992. Now, going back a few years, the oppression of the people in Eastern Europe also created the Solidarity Movement of 1980, which was the first non-communist controlled trade union in a Warsaw Pact country ever. The Polish government attempted to crush it with the martial law of 1981 after it had become a symbol of the resistance against communism. Yet it resurged, and the government was forced to negotiate, leading to a semi-free election in 1989, which then led to the fall of communism in Poland. Anyway, back to America. In 1983, the U.S. invaded the island of Grenada after the murder of the former Grenadian Prime Minister Maurice Bishop. His political opponents, the People's Revolutionary Government of Grenada, the people who usurped him in a revolution of 1979, killed Bishop after he disputed the claim of the PRGG. The invasion of Grenada was well received by Americans, especially when U.S. soldiers rescued American students studying abroad on the island. And also the fact that they went in not for self-interest, but to save and oppress people from a harsh communist government. Yet some of the actions taken by the Reagan administration were not so popular, as seen as their support of the Nicaraguan Contras, rebel groups that fought against their communist government. While ousting communism was a common goal amongst many Americans, public support was low as many of the Contras violated many human rights during their guerrilla war. They were accused of many things including rape, torture, and indiscriminately attacking civilians. Yet the government persisted on supporting them, even after the Nicaraguan government leveled charges against them for interfering in private affairs. The Iran-Contra affair only served to support the rebels. In exchange for 7 American hostages, Iran wanted weapons to put lots of bullets in lots of things. So, the U.S. had Israel provide Iran with weapons, who then in turn would purchase weapons from the U.S. Then we, the U.S., turned right around and gave all that money to the Contras. Though we got our hostages back, the general public hated the fact that the government simultaneously helped violent rebels, a country with a hostage-taking tendency, and the still controversial Israel, who had invaded Lebanon in order to rout the Palestine Liberation Organization, who had reportedly attacked 240 Israel targets. On the home front, things were a little less scary. Ronald Reagan was pushing for a more conservative government with what became known as the Reagan Revolution. With his revolution, Reagan tried to decrease the size of the government, tried to push it away from the liberalism that allowed such issues as abortion and homosexuality to flourish, and to get rid of the welfare state in favor for a free market that had little to no government interference. Ironically, during his term, Reagan increased the size of the government instead of shrinking it, and he poured tons of money into stabilizing and intervening the economy. He went the opposite way in his original plans of new federalism, which is taking power from the federal government and giving it back to the state governments. Though he failed in new federalism, he did somewhat support the New Right, which is a movement to make the government more conservative towards issues such as abortion. The New Right also focused on traditionally conservative topics, such as religious rights and national sovereignty. Reagan's support of the New Right is what many believe is what got him elected in the first place. Reagan also worked on fixing the economy after the stock market crashed in October of 1987, which became known as Black Monday. Reagan's economic policy was known as Reaganomics, which focused on cutting government spending, reducing taxes, reducing government regulation, and reducing inflation. While it helped to prevent a total collapse, Reaganomics failed in the respect of cutting government spending and reducing regulation. As part of the defense budget, Reagan proposed the Strategic Defense Initiative, a defensive system that would somehow protect the United States from ballistic missiles fired by the USSR. But the technology required for the system hadn't been invented yet, and would require years of research before any actual system could be feasibly designed. The proposal was so preposterous that many of Reagan's opponents called the plan Star Wars, as it seemed something you'd find in science fiction. Their plan was to put lasers on satellites and shoot the missiles out of the air. HIV was discovered in 1981 in the United States, with AIDS being discovered the following year. Before then, many people were worried at the increasing numbers of youth mortality rates over illnesses that should have easily been overcome. As it was often seen affecting homosexuals, AIDS was given the name Gay-Related Immune Deficiency, or GRID, but the theory that it was only affecting homosexualities was soon disproved. The discovery of AIDS caused a tremendous uproar, as a witch hunt began against homosexuals, gay men in particular. The poor sexual education system also did little to alleviate the situation. The 1980s was significant in that it saw an end to the decade-long confrontation between the US and the USSR that had caused numerous proxy wars and had brought about global fear of a nuclear war. The US received much scorn from the global community for supporting various violent factions such as the Nicaraguan Contras and their fight against communist governments. Yet they were not unsuccessful, as many communist governments around the globe began falling to give way to new democratic governments. Reagan's work on the government and the economy will have lasting effects that can still be seen today.
So please don't go. Don't go. Don't go away. Please don't go. Don't go.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes our presentation on the 80s. I hope you enjoyed, took notes.